Hello! In this video we're going to go through on how to do an ANOVA using G-Power. So our research scenario in this case is there a difference in self-efficacy score, so that's a numeric score, based on leadership style? And that's where our leadership style would be transformational, transactional, and servant. So we have one numeric variable and then we've got 3 or more groups, which makes this an ANOVA. So let's go ahead and just jump into doing G-Power. So t-test is where we normally start, but in this case, what we actually want is an f-test. So we're not doing a t-test. Instead, we're going to come over and do the f-test for ANOVA. Then over here, we're going to change this to ANOVA Fixed Effects Omnibus One Way. We always want to leave it as a priori. Then remember, effect size will always default to the medium, whatever that is, and we like that, so we're going to leave that. Our alpha, error of probability, always 0.05. Our power, remember from when we talked about in the previous lecture where we talked about like what is power, and we went into more detail on effect size and minimum sample size, and your power is always going to be 0.80. You can just say 0.8, but 0.8, 0.80, I normally do 0.80, but it doesn't matter, same thing. And then you need the number of groups, and in this case it is 3 groups. And to be clear, in order to do an ANOVA, you will have at least 3 groups. Now you could have more than 3 groups, but you will have to have at least 3 groups, otherwise this is not an ANOVA, this is an independent samples t-test. So it should have 3 groups, and then go ahead and click calculate. In this case, you're going to get a total sample size of 159. So 159 is that total sample size if you are doing an ANOVA with 3 groups. Now, if you were doing 4 groups, you can see what will happen. It'll just kind of keep going up. So basically, the more groups you have, the higher that total sample size. And you might take that into consideration, for example, if you were looking at different, differences between ethnicities, between different age groups. So if you took age, turned it into a categorical variable, and you had a bunch of groups for age, just remember, the more groups you have for an ANOVA, the higher that sample size. But in this case, the answer for minimum sample size for this research question is 159. Now, when we look at how we're going to write that up, we have our research question scenario. So remember, this is how we would write it up for the discussion for this week, but also if you're doing an quantitative IRB or a quantitative research, for chapter 3 of your dissertation, you will need to include this information. So you will, need to have your research question, the type of statistical test. You should always include the purpose of using G-Power. That is something that you would include in your IRB and your week 3. And your chapter 3 in your dissertation, if it's quantitative, as well as for our class discussion, you need that purpose of using G-Power, and make sure to include a citation. And remember, we did talk about the purpose of using G-Power in a previous video. So then you would include, for this research question, a G-Power analysis was done a priori to establish a rigorous sample size, include power, effect size, and your alpha, and the results from G-Power indicate a minimum sample size of 159. Then see Appendix X, and you need to include that because you should always include the G-Power output, whether it's for our discussion, your IRB, or your Chapter 3, you always include the G-Power output. So that is how you do an ANOVA in G-Power. Let me know if you have any questions.